Hello all you freedom-loving people. Welcome to another episode of Front Page International. I'm your host, Scott Cameron Goulet. The world's biggest economies have started trade talks again. While Biden is trying to distinguish his policies from those of President Trump, a former trade rep warned that continuing trade with the CCP is equivalent to feeding the beast that will eventually eat you. This year's Nobel Peace Prize recognizes what a dangerous era it is to be a journalist reporting the truth. Thousands of demonstrators marched in Rome and other Italian cities over the weekend to protest against the government's COVID-19 vaccine mandate, one of the strictest in the world. Okay, let's get into it. On October 9th, U.S. State Representative Katherine Tai held a video call with Chinese Vice Premier Liu He. Tai wanted to use the call to test whether negotiations could resolve U.S. grievances that the U.S. has over the Communist Party's subsidy practices. The CCP, for its part, asked the U.S. to cancel tariffs. Before the virtual talks, Tai said she would seek frank talks with the CCP and ask it to honor the first phase of the trade agreement that was made with President Trump. In a statement from Tai, she emphasized U.S. concerns relating to China's state-led non-market policy and practices that harm American workers, farmers, and businesses. A senior U.S. state official said, "We recognize that Beijing is increasingly explicit, that it is doubling down on its authoritarian, state-centric approach and is resistant to addressing our structural concerns. Therefore, our primary focus will continue to be on building resilience and competitiveness, diversifying markets, and limiting the impact of Beijing's harmful practices. Future agreements with the CCP will depend upon how China responds," the official said, declining to elaborate on possible next steps. The U.S. Trade Representative under President Donald Trump, Robert Lighthizer, recently wrote in The Economist that the annual U.S. transfusion of blood to China through trade deficits only feeds the Communist Party and harms both U.S. and global interests. It is also unusual for The Economist, a longtime advocate of the free trade theory, to publish Lighthizer's conservative trade ideas. Lighthizer said that trade over the years has amounted to the U.S. handing over trillions of dollars of its wealth to other countries, with the CCP getting the biggest chunk. He warned that if the U.S. trade deficit is allowed to continue, the United States will die of blood loss. He pointed out, China is not only our global adversary, but it is in competition with the Western free democratic system to determine if it or their system will endure, whether liberal democracy or autocratic socialism is better. It is not an exaggeration to say that the hundreds of billions of dollars that we send to China every year has made the Chinese Communist Party much richer and helped pay for a great expansion of its military capability. This is neither in the interest of America nor the free world. He concluded that the country's deficit with the CCP is so immense that new thinking and hefty tariffs are required. Since China joined the World Trade Organization, the WTO, in 2001, the United States has for 3 successive generations engaged with the CCP through high-level strategic dialogue to ensure that it complied with the WTO rules. But Katherine Tai said that the CCP's follow-through was inconsistent and impossible to enforce. Tai was involved in some of the 27 WTO dispute settlement cases against the CCP. She said, even when China changed the specific practices we challenged, it did not change the underlying policies, and meaningful reforms by China remain elusive. Tai believes that separating from the CCP isn't a realistic outcome in terms of our global economy. Rather, Washington will pursue a course of durable coexistence with it. One of the officials said, "We recognize that China simply may not change and that we have to have a strategy that deals with China as it is rather than as we might wish it to be." The Biden administration is trying to distinguish its policies from those of President Donald Trump, but so far it has been largely carrying on what the Trump administration has put in place. Biden has been in office for less than a year and has essentially come to the same conclusion as the previous Trump administration, namely that the CCP is unlikely to change, and the old approach of pushing the CCP to change will not work. Beyond tariffs, the Biden administration may be able to implement more and tougher sanctions against the CCP, but the administration has kind of trapped itself by saying that it does not want to exacerbate trade tensions. Knowing that the CCP will not change and seeing no real effective restraint tools, if the U.S. stops using tariffs or gives up some of its tariffs, the CCP will not even honor the first phase of the agreement. Claude Barfield, a former consultant to the Office of the U.S. Trade Representative and a senior fellow at the Washington-based think tank American Enterprise Institute, noted that Tai danced around the details. He said that this shows that the administration's trade policy was still very much a work in progress. The 2021 Nobel Peace Prize was awarded on Friday to two journalists, Maria Ressa and Dmitry Muratov, for their efforts to safeguard freedom of expression in the Philippines and Russia. Ressa became the first Filipino to win the Peace Prize and also the first woman to claim the prestigious award by the Nobel Committee this year. The Swedish body said in a statement that Ressa uses freedom of expression in her work to expose abuse of power, use of violence, and growing authoritarianism in the Philippines. In 2012, Ressa became the co-founder of the digital media company Rappler, which focused critical attention on controversial, murderous anti-drug campaign allegedly committed by the regime of Philippine leader Rodrigo Duterte. Russian journalist Dmitry Muratov is one of the founders of the independent magazine Novaya Gazeta, established in 1993 after the collapse of the Soviet Union. For many years, he led the Russian newspaper, which focused on human rights, press freedom, and the persecution of journalists while exposing social injustice, abuse of power, and corruption by Russian officials under Putin's rule. In recent years, the newspaper has also published articles criticizing the deteriorating human rights situation in China. The Nobel Committee called it the most independent newspaper in Russia today, with a fundamentally critical attitude toward power. Muratov said on Friday he was dedicating the prize to 6 fellow Novaya Gazeta journalists who were reportedly murdered for their work. Muratov said, "We will leverage this prize in the interest of Russian journalism, which the authorities are now trying to repress." Many Russian political commentators note that the dissident movement had a high point in the USSR after Andrei Sakharov won the Nobel Peace Prize in 1975. After Mikhail Gorbachev received the Nobel Peace Prize in 1990, the Soviet dictatorship collapsed and it soon fell shortly after. 5 years after Belarusian writer Svetlana Alexievich, who was a critic of the government, won the Nobel Prize for Literature, Belarus erupted in massive spontaneous protests for freedom and democracy. What this means for Putin's regime, since Russia now has another Nobel Prize winner, is of particular thought and concern. It is certainly an important inspiration for currently repressed Russian media professionals and the increasingly repressed Russian society. Author and political commentator Alexei Nikolsky said that many people do not see a hope for the future in today's Russia. Both the Kremlin and Duterte's office congratulated the journalists for their prize. It is also interesting to see how the Chinese Communist Party reacted to the news. China is one of the countries with the least press freedom in the world. State-owned media only reported briefly who won the Nobel Peace Prize without mentioning what contributions the two laureates have made. Even this short news report was quickly blocked by censors. All you can see now is the words 404 and sorry. Reporters Without Borders said that in 2020, the CCP arrested 117 journalists, accounting for 1/3 of all journalists arrested worldwide, making it the world's most imprisoned country for journalists for the 2nd year in a row. Our world is full of misinformation. We strongly believe that media freedom remains an important part of democratic societies and essential to the protection of human rights and fundamental freedoms. People need freedom of expression and freedom of the press to provide them with accurate information and to hold governments accountable. And that is why it's so important for each and every one of us to help spread the word about this show and others like it. Every like, comment, and share helps more people to see the truth. If you're new to the channel, please subscribe. And if you would like to help Front Page, please consider supporting us by donating to our donor box or subscribing to our membership site. The links are in the description below. We here at Front Page thank you for your support. Okay, let's get back into it. The Czech Republic center-right opposition party, which is called Together, beat Prime Minister Andrej Babis's ANO party in a surprise parliamentary election on October 9th and pledged to form a new government with allies who will have a combined majority of seats. Together with another opposition party, the Liberal Pirates and Mayor's Party, were on track to win a combined 108 seats in the 200-seat lower house Chamber of Deputies. The Communist Party, which had backed Babis's minority administration for the past 4 years, dropped out of parliament for the first time since World War II. His other party, the center-left Social Democrats, also dropped out of parliament. The Communist Party had ruled the Central European nation from 1948 until the Velvet Revolution of 1989 that ushered in democracy. The Communists jailed tens of thousands into forced labor camps in the 1950s and brutally repressed dissidents such as playwright-turned-president Václav Havel. The Communist Party had remained in parliament following the revolution, but in last week's election, Czech's Communist Party took only 3.6% of the vote, less than the 5% needed to enter parliament. This potentially marks the final chapter of a party that has gradually shrunk as its aging membership has dwindled. After 1989, the Communists sought to appeal to senior citizens and working-class Czechs, but they never resonated with younger voters and failed to shake off the party's history as totalitarian rulers who have stifled freedom. The Communists lingered mostly in isolation after 1989, though they cooperated with other parties seeking votes to pass legislation. They were also close to current President Miloš Zeman. The party regained influence in 2018 when Babis, a former Communist Party member, leaned on them to support his minority government. It was the closest the Communists had come to power since 1989. It appears to also represent the Communist Party's final act as a political force in the former Soviet bloc nation. Hanna Palkova, a 74-year-old woman who left the country under threat from the secret police, told Reuters, "I am overjoyed that this era is now over, not only for those of us still living, but also for those who have passed away or who were persecuted by the regime." Thousands of demonstrators marched in Rome and other Italian cities over the weekend to protest against the government's COVID-19 vaccine mandate, one of the strictest in the world. Starting on October 15th, the country's Green Pass vaccine requirement will apply to private and public sector workplaces, with both employers and employees risking significant fines if they don't comply. A vaccine passport is already required before entering restaurants, gyms, theaters, and other establishments, as well as domestic flights, bus travel, and long-distance train travel. Some protesters clashed with police as they marched to Italian Prime Minister Mario Draghi's office. Police responded with water cannons and tear gas. A group tried to break through police lines to get to Draghi's office, according to footage and pictures taken at the event, although footage also shows police swinging batons at the demonstrators. Opponents of the Green Pass say it tramples on freedoms and is an indirect way of forcing vaccinations on people. Elsewhere, critics of vaccine passports have said that such systems would create a segregated two-tier society of the vaccinated and the unvaccinated. In France, protesters have demonstrated every weekend for several months against the country's vaccine mandate. It forces people at restaurants, gyms, some travel systems, and theaters to show proof of vaccination before entering. Also, Australia's largest city, Sydney, has emerged from COVID lockdowns after almost 4 months, with locals celebrating a range of new freedoms. People lined up for cafes and stores that opened at midnight on Monday. Many others enjoyed reunions with relatives and friends. Household visits and travel had been restricted beyond a 5-kilometer or 3.1-mile radius during the lockdown. Sydney exited lockdown after the state of New South Wales reached a 70% double-dose vaccination target for anyone over 16. More restrictions will ease when 80% of people are fully vaccinated. Currently, over 90% have received a first dose. The state has not yet imposed a system to check vaccination status, leaving it up to individual businesses. Sydney's lockdown began in late June after a Delta variant outbreak took hold, leading to more than 50,000 infections and 439 deaths. The Delta variant spread to Melbourne and Canberra, prompting them to lock down also. Canberra is due to exit lockdown on Friday, while Melbourne is predicted to reopen in late October. The rapid spread of the Delta variant forced a greater focus on vaccination efforts, so Australia could switch to living with the virus. It's worth noting that Queensland, West Australia, South Australia, Tasmania, and the Northern Territory have remained virus-free after shutting their borders to infected states. Authorities have stated that Australians living abroad could travel back into Sydney next month as the nation's borders reopen. As the number of vaccinated continues to rise, Australia is planning to return to normal in stages, with the fully vaccinated entering and leaving the country starting in November. Okay, this is our show for today. I hope you've enjoyed our little trip around the world. If you want more Front Page, please join our membership site for in-depth reports and sensitive news that you cannot see on YouTube. And if you like what you heard, please don't forget to like and subscribe this video and share it with your friends and family, because everybody deserves to know the truth. Again, thank you for watching Front Page, and we will see you next time.